nice to see you. I'm calling from Copenhagen, currently here as associate professor at the IT University of Copenhagen. Been looking into women and games as a research topic since my master's, 2003 or something, and then been teaching in around games for 17 years, quite specifically about games 15 years. So kind of that would be my background, where I'm kind of what probably prompts somebody to invite me to present here today. So let's get started. I have some slides to share, and you should be able to see them now. I'm going to make them slightly bigger. And I thought, since I'm somebody who by default doesn't necessarily fit the mold of a game design or development educator, I thought I would talk about how I ended up there and how I might do things slightly differently from others. So coming from more media studies, cultural studies, theory background, and then ending up teaching in design schools, in technical universities, I feel my approach has been slightly different, and I had to make different adjustments to my style as a teacher, to my style as a kind of researcher, adjust my expectations, my research focus a little bit, and so forth. So I do not come from the industry. I didn't have strong practice myself when I started teaching games, and that's kind of where we are getting started. I have a slide about the geography of all of this. Now I put the flags there to show that even though there might not be any other clear pattern in the countries I have worked in, there is something that has to do with color coding. So clearly I have limitations in terms of where I can move next. But I'm Finnish. I did my master's at the University of Lapland, and before that I was doing IT studies in my hometown in Jyväskylä, did some exchange in Czech Republic, and then became a visiting PhD student at the IT University of Copenhagen, where I'm also currently. Did my PhD studies in cultural and media studies, creative industries at University of the West of England in Bristol, and then moved to Hong Kong, where I was 9 years, working at the Chinese university and mostly at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, leading a master's stream in game development. As the only teacher in that whole program, we took 20 students annually. And then my journey there was from research associate to visiting assistant professor, research assistant professor, and then finally assistant professor. And then 1 year ago, I moved to Copenhagen to be an associate professor in a much, much bigger team, part of a big team of teaching games design and game development. And yeah, big change there as well. And I think there was a very clear moment when I realized that I wanted to teach game design and game development. I wanted to be on that side instead of writing books about games that I kind of initially, before doing my PhD, thought I would be doing. And that has to do with my PhD and very kind of very strong theory in cultural studies, old theory that was built when a group of people were studying Sony Walkman and looking at how different kind of aspects of culture and people's everyday lives and our society in general relate to kind of contribute to the success and the use and the kind of everything that relates to person using a cultural product or a technology. And I realized when I looked at The Sims as a game that there is this one really big area, which is the development and the development culture, which actually has a huge influence on what ends up being in the game, obviously to everybody here, but not so much to me. That I shifted my thinking from looking at the players, looking at the games themselves, to understanding that if I want to influence, what I saw was a mismatch between content and the female players that I was looking at or studying. I should actually maybe become one of those people who are educating the future game developers and game designers. And that's how I ended in a position where I wanted to be a positive role model to very different kinds of young designers and developers, and primarily for women entering the industry or hoping to enter the industry. And I do think that I was slightly different as a teacher. I was, well, I am, at least in Hong Kong, I haven't established myself so clearly in Denmark yet, but I was quite close, I feel, to my students. I tried to encourage the females to participate in different ways. When I started as the leader of the program and the teacher, women were really a minority. And then when I left several years later, it was pretty much half-half, or it was half-half, sometimes even more women than men in that program. So I feel like maybe just by being there, I don't know if I actually did something, or was it enough that I was the leader, there was a female leading that program, that was enough to invite more women to join. But I was the only female in the larger group in the master's program, and I had to do things differently from the others, I feel, to kind of make it my thing and not to replicate what others coming from the industry or having a strong practice of their own would be doing much better. Another thing that I kind of took as a goal was that I wanted to volunteer in significant roles in the research community as well, because I thought that's part of being a good role model. And that also probably made it easier to overcome my kind of being afraid of taking roles like the first president of Chinese Digital Games Research Association, or now the vice president of DICRA, because I was always going with that thing in mind, that I will kind of help those other women to think that they can get there too if I do it now. And then that kind of strengthened me in that position as well. And I mean, I have enjoyed it all the time. And I'm doing what I was not supposed to do, and I'm going through some note papers because I can't see my notes here. Apologies for that. Another thing that I kind of wanted to do from the very beginning was that I didn't want to separate my work and my life. Or the kind of, I saw them as one, and I tried to bring my kids to the workplace as much as possible. There I am pregnant, leading the Global Game Jam Hong Kong in 2016. My colleagues knew my kids. Whenever we went to a conference, my then daughter, and these days both of them, are most welcome to join. And I realized very soon that this was something that encouraged others, especially in Hong Kong, to bring kids to events as well. So I saw it as a very positive change there. Maternity leave in Hong Kong at the time I got my first child was 10 weeks. So that also means that if you want to be a working parent or working mother, this is the only option. So I had to integrate those two. Denmark now, of course, totally different. You would have that 1 year to take care of your child. I'm not sure if I wanted to do that. I probably wouldn't want to do that. So the Hong Kong model fit me very well, as long as I was able to kind of bring my kids to work. And in the classroom, because my background was different, I also wanted to make it as easy and welcoming for people from very different backgrounds, also in terms of what kind of players they were. So I made it very sure that in the classroom we didn't have any kind of clear canon of games that everybody should have been played this game, or you would be able to mention a specific game, so that assuming that everybody knows the game. I play games by myself very widely and try not to stick into the AAA titles or the titles that everybody speaks in the office about. And this was something that I feel made the space more inclusive. There was no correct engines to use. And then another really important thing for me was that there's no player jargon and there's no industry jargon spoken in the classroom without explaining every single term, at least when they are used for the first time. And this was sometimes tricky with guest speakers, but I thought it was really important that when a guest speaker comes in and they use their very specific language, that students actually know what they are talking about. So I would be there next to the speaker, writing down terms on the whiteboard, so that at least every time there was a term that I recognized as something that you don't need to know as a student, don't worry if you don't know this. It would be visible there on the whiteboard, and the students wouldn't feel so bad. And then after the class or after the guest talk, we would go through those terms. And I felt that was quite a nice practice, and it probably made it more welcoming. I tried to be unassuming about anything related to the industry or the industries, especially in Hong Kong. There are references a lot made to the West, whatever it means, to the US companies, but at the same time, China game development culture, or the many cultures there as well, are huge and powerful. So that's also one of the reasons why I tried to maneuver between these different things and try to include as much as possible, and also was very much able to say that I don't know about something if I didn't. And I was trying to introduce alternatives also in terms of making what kind of games you can make if you are a game designer or developer. And one of the things that I started was the Global Game Jam in 2013. We grew from around 80 people to more than 400 in 6 years. And it was an amazing event. I miss all the times we organized it together with amazing people, and trying to make it again as inclusive as possible, having as many women in the organization as possible, and making the space safe and so forth. So this was a big emphasis of mine. And I also, again, I felt like if I was there visible throughout the jam and on the stage, it would welcome more women to come to the event. And there's a slight regret, which is that when I left Hong Kong, I left this all to Peter Ng, who is an amazing person and who is doing the jam amazingly, but at the same time, there was no female successor. So kind of that would have been my wish, that maybe somebody is in an assistant professor, associate professor position, or in the industry kind of higher position female who could have taken over. So yeah, something to consider when you build something and then you leave. What is the legacy you are kind of leaving behind? And being a researcher, I of course had to have research going alongside all the teaching as well. And while I was doing more theory-based stuff before, when I started teaching games in Hong Kong, I also had to take over more development projects, so design research-based in design and so forth. And then I ended up making, well, this is my very first game from 2005, which was made in collaboration with Nokia and different universities in Finland, where we created a mobile game, location-based mobile game that was supposed to teach young people about democracy. A huge goal, ambitious goal. We didn't get anywhere near that, but it was fun to explore, and we were definitely kind of early in that area, but maybe the technology wasn't exactly there to support our location-based gaming. But then in Hong Kong, we did staircase games with young kids, or this is a game jam game from Lust in Copenhagen several years back, where we made a game about custody, child custody, which is a kind of multi-device game where you have a child on a mobile and then two players play on iPads or PCs or whatever other computers. And while they are playing on those two main devices, they are also passing the child over from one person to another. So we were kind of exploring the use of multiple devices and screens during one gameplay. I love that project. It didn't get much further from the game jam, but something like more explorative, obviously. Then there were commission projects and projects done with different domain area experts, such as something made with the special schools in Hong Kong for children with autism, one game for young people in rehabilitation from substance abuse. One big project was for Tung Wah College, which is a game that teaches the triage procedure in mass casualty outdoor environment. Very important project for us. Again, very, very nice thing to do. And something that is actually being used actively at the university. So that's what makes it very important for me. And then I think this is something that is known best. I tried to make games for orangutans and with orangutans, and it took several years, and it's still an ongoing process, though I don't have the same access to the individuals I was working with in the past. We also had something called Orangu Jam, I think in 2013, where we invited young people to create games for the first time for orangutans, and they could kind of potentially see how the orangutans play the games, and in the process learning both about game development and about orangutans. So that was my journey very shortly. And I think what I want to say is that even though I would have probably felt more home in many other departments than in design departments or at IT universities, I felt that that's where I found my nook, where I could be useful and where my work is valued and where I could actually make a difference. So that's why I'm very, very happy that I have had the support and the resources and the freedom to make all that kind of in my own way instead of trying to fit into any existing place. And I think also Hong Kong, where I was both the leader and the teacher of the program, I had so much freedom to do it in my own way that it was just really, really great fun. And now looking forward to what happens in Denmark. So yeah, maybe the moments, of course, when I feel that I have been most useful is when I hear from my past students, or especially female students who are leading big Sony developments in China or whatever they are doing, just being successful in their careers. And that would be it. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to answer questions you might have.
That was really, really interesting. Having spent a lot of time in Hong Kong myself, it's a really fast-paced, crazy place to live. How does that compare to Copenhagen?
Where would I start? Do you have any specific area in mind, like in terms of university life or in?
I'm thinking in general. I know it's a hustle and it's a bustle and everything's happening all around you all the time. Like students are in university all the time. They work really, really hard. Is there a huge difference? Big difference?
Yeah, well, obviously a huge difference. Yes, I was working very, very long hours, where I leave on Friday after 3:30. And people would be looking at me in a strange way if there was anybody, and then the kindergarten would be closed at 4, so I won't even be able to pick up my child after 4 o'clock. So kind of the whole rhythm of the day is entirely different. And then of course, like, I mean, there's so many things going on in Hong Kong all the time, so many exciting things. But at the same time, I left Hong Kong in August 2019, and it's not the same place anymore. So even though my departure had nothing to do with what was going on with the protests and the social movement, it's not the same place anymore.
Okay, excellent. Well, we've got a few questions just come in here. So Jonathan says, thank you so much for sharing your story. It sounds like you have constantly done and developed so much, and it sounds like it takes a lot of energy. Do you have low days? Have you ever felt overwhelmed? And how do you overcome that? That's a very good question.
I feel not low days in a way that some people have low days, that it's really low. Like somehow I have been lucky enough to maybe work hard in another area, or just kind of lower my expectations or something like that. Like for instance, what happened yesterday, Charlie knows very well that our university was closed, and the video studio I had booked was cancelled. The IT support I had booked was cancelled. I already wrote a letter to Charlie saying that, sorry, I need to cancel. But then I was like, okay, it's like, if that's what matters, then I'm in the wrong place. And I just thought I will do it from home. I have nice art at, at the home, and I hope that the kids won't come in when I'm here. So I think I just, every time there was something that didn't work, I would just immediately lower my expectations and let it kind of go as things go and wait for the things to solve themselves instead of start kind of thinking them through and overthinking and so forth.
No, absolutely. And from my own experience from teaching and working on a game, I think the most important phrase is a workaround. You know, this doesn't work. Okay, well, what can I do to make it work? Not give up, but you find, you know, you can circumvent, you find how to get things sorted with a workaround.
But that said, I do think that it's really important to also allow yourself to give up sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Like not to feel bad when you say no. When in the last minute, if I had said no yesterday, I know that I wouldn't have felt bad because I still had some good reason to do that. So that's another side of the story, that if you then, it's too much and you say no, then don't stay and think about why did I do that? Did I have to say no and so forth? Like if there's a good reason, then that's it, then move on.
Absolutely. And so now Nicholas has asked a question which Samantha is also extremely interested in, as am I, and I'm sure many other people as well. They're intrigued by the game for orangutans. How does it work? What is it? Tell us everything.
It doesn't work. That's the point. It really doesn't work. So we went screen first. The idea was, there were many goals in the project. One of them was to give people a reason to appreciate and understand orangutans and not to use palm oil.
Yeah.
Okay, big goal in itself. The second one was to learn about orangutans through giving them different kind of content and games and kind of see how they interact with that. For me, I wanted to also learn about human play and the difference between human play and orangutan play. And then there was this idea on top of that, which was that if orangutans are able to use games as humans do, or kind of use the interfaces as what we have, then we would somehow be able to show that they are as intelligent as we are.
Okay.
And this was something that I kind of had to discard very early on, that, okay, that's, first of all, it doesn't need to be like that. Like they have their own intelligence, and it doesn't have to be that they need to somehow adjust their bodies to fit the human technology, because they don't have the cultural background of knowing what is a touch screen, and they don't learn it from a variety of kind of environments, how to use screens, how to use touch screens and so forth. So then when I kind of gave up with the screen and started exploring more with like sticks, for instance, I was observing them hours and hours and noticing that they do many exciting things with sticks. That's just poking at different places, and they like sounds and such. Then we built different interfaces where they would be poking things and sounds would come up and so forth. And that was really working much, much better. Then another problem came, for instance, that the sounds you can't hear in the jungle. It was so loud in the first place with all the birds and everybody there that you couldn't hear anything. Like there was no way we would put in such speakers, loudspeakers, that we would kind of overrun the environment, the ambient jungle sound. So then it was, yeah, that's kind of where my explorations ended. I got my child. I had to do different things. I didn't want to be away from the small child. Family came first at that point. It wasn't exactly so safe to be there in Indonesia with dengue fever and many different reasons. So that's something that I have a lot of data that I want to kind of put together, write more theory around it, and I still supervise different kind of work that is related to animal play, and still a very strong interest of mine. But there were lots of, like, in short, there were lots of different experiments. I learned a lot about those animals or individuals, two individuals that I worked with, and I hope to do much more.
That's a very good answer. So Tomoko has a question here. What does it take to be a games user researcher? I understand it's an emerging discipline, and I'm not sure where or how to start. Any recommendations?
I don't know exactly if you have a very specific, like sometimes in the industry and in academia, these kind of titles have different meanings. But I guess this would be like a way to start by looking at somebody play and kind of learn. It's an ethnographic approach, like anthropological approach, that you kind of learn the skill of observation. Then of course you also need to learn the techniques of using different kind of software for observing people remotely and recording their movements and how they look at the screen and things like that. So it's a kind of a combination of personal observation and then learning from those observations, but also the mastery of the technology that is used in different industry setups, for instance. Where to start? I think any kind of literature around ethnographic fieldwork or user research, kind of user-centered research in general would be kind of obvious place to start. But that's not exactly my topic. Yeah.
Okay, so my own research focuses on Chinese game studies and the UK game studies and the comparison. And I found many differences between the way that Chinese people play games versus Western or UK people play games. Have you noticed differences yourself between Hong Kong and Copenhagen? Now you've been there a little bit.
The only thing I can kind of very clearly say about is what the students are interested in doing. So whereas in Hong Kong it would be that pretty much every single student would be interested in making a mobile game that helps people relax, that you would be able to play in the subway or in a bus. That's something that rarely happens in Copenhagen. Like nobody plays games in public transportation. I don't know why, but it's just I've never seen a single person playing on a mobile in public transportation. And then they have more like an indie PC gaming focus. My students here, I feel, very different approach to game development. Also then the kind of the games that they would know before they enter a game development program would be entirely different between those two different cities, or Copenhagen and Hong Kong.
That's really interesting that they don't play games whilst waiting for buses or on public transport. It's almost, I can't even imagine it.
That's worth a study. There must be some kind of cultural stigma related to looking at your
so people
mobile when
talk to each other.
Yes, well, I don't know if that happens, but or maybe there's just not enough people to do that. I don't know, but yeah, if there maybe people move in groups or pairs more than individually.
That's really interesting. And so you mentioned that your background, you focused on the cultural studies and how that applies to games. Do you feel that cultural studies, sociology, psychology, all of these should be part and parcel of games research and game studies?
Yeah, absolutely. We have, for instance, in our program currently, we have a course which is games psychology. And one of the topics that the person who is running that, Rune Nielsen, is he's kind of covering the area of addiction, which is really complicated and which often comes as a kind of a problem for young developers when there's a person who accuses them of creating things that cause addiction, and they need to have the answer. They need to kind of understand what does it mean to talk about these things, that it's a medical condition, but in the wider culture we talk about it in a totally different way, and it's not really about addiction and so forth. So yeah, for many different reasons, it informs your design, but it also informs you about how to talk with others about your profession and how you kind of defend yourself as a game developer sometimes against a lot of backlash still from the wider public, especially parents, concerned, like carefully, yeah, concerned parents.
Absolutely. I'm a research assistant on a new project, AHRC funded project, where we're actually looking into games addiction in Chinese students and Western students, and how the governments and the law-giving bodies are dealing with this, but also how the game studios are dealing with it as well. Because as a game studio, you want your game to be played as much as possible, but you, just like you said, you don't want to be accused of creating addiction. So very tricky line to walk, is it not?
Yeah, and how now in China, like if you should be doing something that is more like a useful, serious games, and if you can add any kind of serious aspect to your game, that would make it more favorable to kind of.
Absolutely. So do we have any more questions for Hannah before we wrap up? No. Well,
Well, the time is exactly there.
exactly that. Thank you so much for agreeing
Thank
to
you. My pleasure.
persevere and do this for us. We really, really appreciate it. And it was fantastic. Thank you very much.
Cool. Have a good conference.
Yeah.
I've been enjoying it as well. Thank
Good.
you.
I'm really glad. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.